A German tank commander later said, "We thought it would take 5 minutes. It took 6 hours. And the men who stopped them weren't soldiers. Not really. They were typists, clerks, the men who filed paperwork and counted ammunition crates, the men who, back home, had worked in offices and accountancy firms and corner shops. 17 tanks, 40 infantry, one of the most battle-hardened armored units the Wehrmacht had left, stopped cold by 12 men with a single gun and 11 shells. This is not a story about heroes who were born for war. This is a story about ordinary men who simply refused to run. October 3rd, 1944, Belgium. And the next 6 hours are going to be unlike anything you've heard. To understand what happened on that farm road, you need to understand what these men were and what they were not. None of them had trained for this. None of them had ever faced a tank before. Most had never fired a weapon under real combat conditions. Their daily routine involved personnel records, supply manifests, casualty returns, the kind of work that keeps an army running but never makes it into the history books. The senior man was Corporal Alfred Sims, 31 years old, wire-rimmed spectacles, a former accounts clerk from Birmingham who had joined up in 1941 not because he was built for war, but because there was a war and he was there. The men under him were the same kind, ordinary, unremarkable on paper. But here's the thing about ordinary men under impossible pressure. You never really know what they're made of until the moment arrives. The 11th Armored Division, the Black Bull, had driven hard through France and Belgium in the summer and autumn of 1944. By early October, its forward elements were fighting near the Maas River. The rear echelon, including Sims and his 12-man administrative section, had settled into a requisitioned farmhouse complex 4 kilometers south of Hechtel. It felt safe. The front was miles away. That morning, they were processing casualty returns. At 0940 hours, a dispatch rider came in on a motorcycle, mud-soaked, face white. He had seen German armor, moving south, down the exact road that ran through their position. Elements of the 9th SS Panzer Division, the Hohenstaufen, were executing a localized counterattack designed to slash through Allied supply lines and hit rear area headquarters. They weren't expecting resistance. Why would they be? This was the rear. The column was 3 kilometers out and moving fast. Sims had maybe 20 minutes. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He looked at what he had. 12 rifles, 2 Brand light machine guns, 4 grenades per man, 1 QF 6-pounder anti-tank gun, abandoned 2 days earlier when its towing vehicle broke down, and 11 rounds of armor-piercing shot. 11 rounds, 17 tanks. He did the math. It didn't work, not even close. He gave the order to prepare positions anyway. The farmhouse sat at a bend in a narrow farm road, flanked on both sides by thick hedgerows. It was, almost accidentally, a decent defensive position. The bend forced approaching vehicles to slow. The hedges concealed men. The stone walls of the farmhouse could absorb small arms fire. Sims worked fast. Every decision mattered now. He placed the 6-pounder at the far right of the farmhouse wall, angled to engage the road at 150 yards. Close enough for the armor-piercing shot to punch through the front hull of a Panzer IV, but only if the shot was clean, only if the crew didn't flinch. Crewing the gun, Private Thomas Hackett, a mechanic from Coventry who understood the weapon's mechanism, and Private Roy Ellison, 19 years old, who would load. The 2 Brens went into upper floor windows. 5 riflemen staggered along the hedge line to the left with one order: keep the infantry off the flanks. If the line broke, fall back north and warn divisional headquarters by any means possible. By 10:10 hours, the positions were set, and then they waited. The sound came first, a low mechanical groan carrying across the still autumn air. Then the ground trembled, faintly but unmistakably. Then, through gaps in the hedgerow, steel. Gray, green, and massive, moving at walking pace. The long 75mm barrel of the lead Panzer IV swinging slowly as the commander scanned the road ahead from his open turret. Behind it, more shapes. 5 tanks visible, then more behind those. And on both flanks of the road, moving in loose open order, Panzer grenadiers, field gray uniforms, at least 40 men, possibly more. One of the clerks pressed himself against the farmhouse wall and closed his eyes for a moment. Nobody spoke. At 10:17 hours, the lead tank crossed the bend and entered the straight stretch of road, 140 yards from Hackett and the gun. Sims watched it come. 130, 120. At 120 yards, he raised his hand and dropped it. Hackett fired. The round struck the lead tank on the lower front hull. For half a second, nothing. Then the Panzer shuddered violently, swung left, and stopped dead. Smoke poured from the engine compartment. It was blocking the road. Both Brens opened up instantly, raking the infantry on the flanks. Controlled, disciplined bursts, exactly as practiced. The Panzer grenadiers scattered into ditches and hedges. For 11 minutes, the column did not move. Sims let himself breathe. Then the second tank pushed forward, trying to shove the rack aside. Hackett fired again. This round hit the track assembly. The tank lurched sideways, immobilized, but its turret was still alive. It rotated toward the farmhouse. At 10:31 hours, it fired. The high-explosive shell struck the wall 6 feet above Hackett's head. Stone fragments exploded outward. Both men were thrown back, but when the dust cleared, they were still there, and the gun was still intact. By 11 o'clock hours, the Germans had reorganized and the real pressure began. 2 Panzers pushed off the road entirely, trying to flank left through the adjacent field. Sims redirected his riflemen along the hedge, not to stop tanks with rifles, which was suicidal, but to drive off the infantry moving with them. Tank commanders in close terrain without infantry eyes were nervous and cautious. That nervousness was the only weapon Sims had. It worked, barely. For 2 hours, the battle became a grinding, ugly thing. German probes, Bren bursts, rifle fire, and short, controlled volleys. The flanking tanks bogged in soft autumn soil. Weeks of Belgian rain had churned the fields into mud. The infantry pushed 3 times along the roadside ditches. 3 times they were thrown back. But the ammunition was going. By 12:30 hours, Hackett had 9 rounds fired, 2 tanks killed, 3 immobilized, 2 struck but still operational. 2 rounds left. 3 men wounded. Private Derek Meadows had taken a rifle round through the forearm and was still firing one-handed. Private George Abbott had a shrapnel gash across his scalp, blood running into his eyes, and refused to leave his position. Sims moved between them in a low crouch, redistributing rounds, checking fields of fire, saying something quiet to each man. What he didn't tell them, what he kept to himself, was that he had called for help on the field telephone the moment the column was spotted. He had received no response. At 13:05 hours, everything changed. A Sturmgeschütz 3 assault gun, lower, wider, and harder to engage than the tall Panzer IVs, had worked its way through a gap in the hedge line on the left flank. It was moving toward the farmhouse from an angle the 6-pounder could not cover. The gun had to move. In the open, under fire, with 2 men and no cover. Sims made the decision without hesitation. He took Hackett's position at the gun as a decoy, while Hackett and Ellison grabbed the wheels and pushed. An NG-42 opened up, 1,200 rounds per minute, the sound like tearing canvas, and swept the courtyard. The rounds struck 2 feet behind the men as they ran. They got it into position. Hackett loaded the 10th round. He looked at Sims. For the first time that morning, Sims didn't look at the enemy. He looked at his men. The blood, the dust, the exhaustion in their eyes. And for just a second, Just 1 second, he wasn't sure they were going to hold. Then Hackett fired. The round caught the Sturmgeschütz on its side armor, the weak point. The vehicle erupted. Secondary explosions tore it apart from the inside, sending a column of black smoke 200 feet into the gray Belgian sky. But there were still 7 German armored vehicles operational, and the infantry, more than 30 men still combat effective, was now mounting a coordinated assault from 3 directions simultaneously. 1 round left in the ammunition box. At 13:40 hours, a direct tank round hit the farmhouse's upper floor. The ceiling came down. Both Bren guns went silent. Private James Norris, 21 years old, from Leeds, the youngest man in the section, was killed instantly. Lance Corporal Peter Whitfield dragged his Bren to a ground floor window, racked the bolt on his last half magazine, and kept firing. The German infantry was 40 yards from the walls, then 30. At 13:47 hours, something changed in the air. Not gunfire, not engines, something else, above them. One of the men heard it first, a sound that started as a low vibration and built quickly into a roar. Then 2 shapes came in hard and low over the tree line from the north, dropping beneath the cloud ceiling at barely 500 feet. Hawker Typhoons, No. 245 Squadron, RAF. A signals officer at divisional headquarters had pieced together a fragmentary distress message, had understood, barely in time, what was happening on the farm road 4 kilometers south, had diverted 2 aircraft from a close support mission further north. The lead pilot would later write in his post-mission report that the target was unmistakable. Burning armor on a farm road, a smoke-blackened farmhouse, and German infantry in the open with no air cover. Each Typhoon carried 8 RP-3 rockets. The strike lasted less than 90 seconds. 4 more German vehicles were destroyed or left burning. The Panzer Grenadiers, caught completely in the open, took devastating casualties. The surviving armor, 3 Panzer IVs, 2 with damaged tracks, turned and withdrew, east, back the way they came. The road went quiet. Alfred Sims stood up. For a long moment he just stood there, behind the wall where he'd spent the last 6 hours, and looked at the road, at the wrecked and burning column, at the thin gray smoke rising into the Belgian sky. Then he sat down in the mud and said nothing for a very long time. When British recovery teams reached the position 2 hours later, they documented what they found. 5 German armored vehicles destroyed, 3 more captured intact, an estimated 22 Panzer Grenadiers killed, 31 taken prisoner, leaderless and broken after the airstrike. They had simply stopped fighting. The 12 men of the administrative section, 1 killed, 4 wounded, the rest still standing, still armed, still at their posts. Corporal Alfred Sims received the Military Medal. His citation, signed by Major General G.P.B. Roberts, commanding the 11th Armored Division, described his conduct as displaying coolness and tactical judgment of the highest order under conditions of extreme danger. Private Thomas Hackett, the mechanic who had fired 10 rounds and destroyed or disabled 7 armored vehicles, was mentioned in dispatches. The action was later referenced in British Army training doctrine as a case study in improvised anti-tank defense, cited in after-action reports, studied in classrooms. But none of that is what stayed with the men who were there. Years later, when the veterans of that section were asked about that morning, they didn't talk about the tactics, they didn't talk about the gun or the rockets or the medals. They talked about one moment. The moment when the tanks were still coming, the ammunition was almost gone, and not one of them ran. Not one. Because somewhere else, on another road, on another gray October morning in another country most of them had never heard of before the war, something like this was happening again. 12 more men, or 8, or 20, Men who weren't supposed to be there, men with no business holding that line, holding it anyway. Most of them never made it into the history books. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, America and WWII Stories, as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.